before the game was released, I made this pre-release analysis video where I mostly talked about my thoughts and what I had taken from the CBT3 going into the game's release. To no one's surprise, it aged like milk. Partially at least, but even partially badly aged milk is still bad milk and you wouldn't want to drink the rest of it.
For you, if you haven't watched my previous video, that's okay, you don't need to.
I will bring up the most important points if necessary. Quickly, before we start, this video is sponsored by Zenless Zone Zero, and if you are new to ZZZ and have not downloaded the game yet, please do so using my link in the description. Oh, and also 2 days ago, ZZZ just hit 50 million global downloads and gave out another free 1600 polychromes, so go and get them while you can. That said, let's directly get into it. The first thing I did in that video was yapping about disorder teams. And I mean, that is what I thought, honestly. Those were teams that seemed extremely good in the CBT3 and still seem really good right now. Turns out though, stun is also pretty freaking broken. Enemies which cannot move and take a truckload of additional damage for a large amount of time are surprisingly pretty good. This also means that basically all teams are extremely reliant on a stunner, and the better the stunner, the better the team. Due to the core skill passive requiring a party member within the same attribute or faction, teams which can more easily activate all 3 additional abilities are stronger than those who cannot. An example here being Nekomiya, who needs to fall back to be paired with agents such as Ambi and Nicole to get the most out of her kit, but she performs better when actually ignoring her additional ability entirely and instead focus on a strong stun and support core with, for example, Kolidar or Lucy, or Lycon and Sukaku. While Nekomiya's core ability buffs only one of her possible 3 EX specials, Lucy's ability to have her boars inherit her crit values and Kolidar's ability to buff her entire team's chain attack damage up to 70%
is honestly pretty insane.
Actually, while we are at it, let's also quickly dive into Lucy for a bit and talk about why she's a pretty insane unit to build. First up, her boars actually have an insane scaling. Up to 415% on the slingshot, 300% on their boxing gloves and 220% on the baseball bat. Given that we have 3 boars, let's assume they just have one of each for simplicity's sake, and given how these boars are active and deal damage even when she isn't on the field, that is an additional damage of up to 930%, and that does not even include the guaranteed spin to win of those, with nearly 600% each, which means a total of 1800% scaling. Our main problem being that the boars sometimes have a problem keeping up with enemies, but especially if enemies are mostly immobile or stunned, that is honestly not really that deep of a problem. But she also does provide insane damage, especially given how she is a, well, support unit, apparently. Not only does she provide sad damage, but also up to 600 flat attack to not only the entire squad, but also your bamboos and even her boars at 200% efficiency. If you have her Mindscape Cinema 2, and I will just refer to that as C2 from now on, she doesn't even need her 4th basic attack to trigger the tier on buff, but using her chain attack or ultimate does so as well. Speaking about new characters, Piper is the second new character who not only was not present in the CBT2, but also again just got announced shortly before the game's release. As an anomaly unit, it is to no one's surprise that her physical anomaly application is pretty freaking good, and while she can provide a pretty significant 18% damage bonus to the entire squad at full stacks of her passive, while also easily stacking assault and hence the increased 10% daze buff from flinch, she also requires a lot of field time to get there. This means that she competes with other physical DPS's field time, which is not necessarily something every DPS can afford. However, the bigger problem with her, at least right now, and in my opinion, is her having very limited potential teammates to synergize with. All of the physical units currently are DPS units, yes, also Piper is a DPS unit, which would result in the aforementioned field time problem, and outside of that, only Lucy can satisfy her current needs, as she can provide her the faction needed while also not taking said required field time. However, given her anomaly application as well as damage output, she currently is probably better than Billy and Corrin, and while her damage is somewhat similar to Neko, Neko has slightly more flexible teams and does not require as much field time as Piper does. However, they don't also synergize super well with each other either, as both kinda want to be on field while the enemy is stunned. So that makes those 2 units actually quite good, and I actually haven't included them in my previous video, which makes sense because I didn't know they existed. Talking about my previous video, I actually put Nicole, Ambi, Anton and Billy in the same tier, that one being C, and I think that's not really true. At least for Billy. Billy just doesn't compete well with his competition, that being other physical DPS agents. However, Corrin is somewhat in the same spot. While both can fulfill their role as one would expect, which is dish out damage, Piper and Nekomiya both just do a better job. Nicole found herself a role in a non-ether team, that being with Nekomiya, but because that is more out of a necessity than actually being super good, I think the placement I gave her is actually fair, and although she will probably rise up a tier when Sujuan releases. I also might have overestimated Grace's power a bit, or in other words, how strong Disorder teams actually will be. That is not because Disorder is bad, in fact it's actually really good. But stun teams are just too good right now in comparison, while also being easier to play. However, we are also still early into the game. Disorder damage is based on the remaining time of the previously applied anomaly, with a higher remaining time being better, and hence applying 2 different anomalies in fast succession is the key for top damage here. Which means taking care of timing the 2 anomalies is just another layer of difficulty on top, while not necessarily bringing more benefits or significantly more damage to the table than, for example, stun-based mono ice teams such as Alan, Lycon and Sokaku. Talking of which, Lycon is far, and I mean far better than I actually expected. Again, due to how strong Daze and Stun actually is. Soldier 11 got herself another great support with Lucy, which gives her a pretty good team setup with Collider and Lucy in a mono fire team, where Lucy just outclasses Ben, honestly. So, if I would need to revisit my previous tier list, I would do it very similar to how Pritwin did it, but I would move Soldier 11, Lucy and Collider all up into tier 0.5. Lucy is in my opinion a pretty generic support unit, and depending on your account and your available units, she can be slotted into a lot of different teams, even if she brings neither the right element nor faction with herself. Collider being a stun unit, and given the abundance of stunners currently, being the second best choice right behind Lycon, especially for Bellobok and fire teams. For the same reason, I would also move Anby up a tier. Not only is she freely accessible, but she provides a fair amount of stun and is pretty good in Electro teams, while also having a slot as a stunner in Cunning Hare's faction teams, especially given how 2 out of the 3 current stunners are S ranks. Speaking of Cunning Hares, and while it hurts me personally quite a bit, Neko I would actually move down to tier 2, simply because she doesn't provide as much additional value compared to Piper. And mostly it's just a question of trading more flexible field times for higher assault application. Well, or personal preference of course. That said, what else has been discovered since release? Well, animation cancels exist. Similar to another combat heavy game I cover, units can finish their skill animations while not being on the field. This shakes up certain frames I have to account for quite a bit, while also making specific units with very long animations quite a bit better. So, what does all of this mean for team building in CZZ? Well, let's see what I said in my previous video. At this point, I thought of including some general guidelines for building a team, such as every team consisting of an attacker, stun, and anomaly unit, or attacker, anomaly, support, or, well, I don't have to list all of them, you get my point. But I think I would run into very hot territory doing so, as some teams would literally not exist right now if I did so, such as assault teams. Which means I will revisit this in my post-analysis, where I will revisit this video anyway and see where I went wrong and what we learned. However, I think a general guideline for attacker, stun, or anomaly and support are probably a good way to go by, at least for now. Turns out, I actually wouldn't have run into very hot territory, and my previous guideline of attacker, stun and support or anomaly has been quite accurate, and that is even though I vastly underestimated how good and how important Daze and stun actually are. But where I did go wrong have been the Disorder teams. Well, for a different reason though. The main Disorder team of Grace, Collider and Rena is still incredibly good, but that is not necessarily because of how good Disorder is, but because it still utilizes the DPS stun support / anomaly setup. So yeah, while my pre-release tier list aged like milk, I think my team building prediction has been relatively accurate, even if for a different reason. And that being said, thank you so much for watching, please leave a like and comment if you liked this video, subscribe for more Zenless Zone Zero content, don't forget to download the game using my link in the description, and have a great day.